So the first thing we want to try to tackle, we think there could be a fuel leak. When it was in the barn,
Yep.
they were telling us there was fuel on the ground, so we think there's a fuel leak. Right now, if we shake the car, there's no fuel in this thing, I don't think. So it may have already leaked out. So,
Been sitting there a long time.
but it's in there a long time.
Yep.
We can still see a little bit of residue on the bottom. So whether the tank is leaking or the fuel pump is leaking or some of the hoses are leaking, that's what we're going to try to tackle today and just find out what's leaking and where it's leaking.
Okay, so pull the tank completely out?
Let's pull the tank out, that way we can see the bottom side of it and see what's going on with it. There's only 4 bolts holding it in, so that'll be an easy thing to tackle.
Great.
Well, we'll just start disconnecting everything. We'll take these 4 bolts off, we'll take this hose off, and then as we lift up, because I don't know what it looks like under there, we'll see if,
I'll tackle the hoses, you tackle the bolts.
okay.
So you think this is salvageable, savable?
I think so. I mean, the only hole is right here, and whether it rusted through or got poked through, I'm not 100% sure, but the rest of the tank looks really, really solid. So I don't know why we couldn't weld up that hole.
Yep.
And
And this looks like they've truncated something here.
yeah, I'm guessing this was a return line back to the tank.
Okay.
Or from the back of the car, back of the engine, back up to the tank. And it looks like somebody's disconnected that, and we'll have to look into where that went and if we're going to reconnect it back up and just get a little bit more knowledgeable on the fuel system. And, all right, so let's pull the sending unit off and then we get a little better look on the inside.
So after you weld it, does it make sense to give this a good sanding, prime it, and paint it before you put it back in?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll help with a little bit of future corrosion. Some protection on the tank would be a smart thing to do. Now's the time to do it. It's out and it's easy to do. So we'll definitely clean it up, wire brush it as best we can, and get some good paint and primer on it. Yep.
Great, perfect.
Okay. So today we're going to start working on our gas tank. We know we got a repair we got to do to it on the other side, but we also know there's a lot of rust in the tank, and we're going to try to tackle that today as well. I've seen guys dump rocks into their tank and slosh them around. I've seen guys dump a bag of nuts and bolts into their tank and slosh it around. We're going to try something a little different today. I've got a heavy-duty chain, and we're going to drop the chain into the tank and use that to kind of tumble it around and see if we can clean it out. So just a simple matter of dropping it in. And then slosh it around. So I've already done this probably a half a dozen times on this tank. I've done it for 4 or 5 minutes at a time. Actually dumped out the contents, and so far not too bad. I've gotten a fair amount of rust out of the tank. So I may do that a little bit more before we're all done, but I was pretty pleased with that. Essentially what we're going to do is patch this area right here. This is a return line. Once the fuel goes back to the engine, it actually has a return line. Somebody had blocked up this return line and they weren't using it. And they put a little rubber hose and a bolt head on it. We're going to try to get this working again. They do make a connection coming off the tank, a new one. So we're going to go ahead and use that for the tank, but we ended up buying 2 of these, and the reason we're going to do that is we're actually going to try to resurrect the return line, and we're going to use another one of these. So I cut a little piece of steel that fits over that, and because this little piece tubing here already had a washer welded to it, I was able to go around and weld around the washer onto what's going to be our patch panel on the tank. Now what I can do is cut the tank where the corrosion is, cut the patch to fit, and weld that in. You can see there's corrosion here, there's holes in the tank. This is the return line. You can see it was brazed into the tank, I guess, at the factory. So that's the area we're going to cut out. And then this is the piece that will trim to fit the cutout that we'll be welding on. So I'll start by getting this area cut out. So before we started cutting on this tank, we made sure it was completely dry. And this tank had been dry for several years. There wasn't any residue in it. There were no fumes in it. Of course, we made sure of that before we started cutting and making all kinds of sparks here. So the tank was perfectly dry. We still hooked it up to an air supply for a while and a shop vac for a while to exhaust any potential fumes on the inside, but we were pretty confident it was dry and there was going to be no issues or problems grinding or welding on the tank. So we finished cutting out the area to be repaired. We found that there was a baffle on the inside of the tank, so that's kind of what you see there. We cleaned up around there, removed some of the rust, and then we cut the patch panel just with some snips and grinding wheels and such to fit precisely. And by precisely, I mean we actually left a little bit of a gap, about a 1/16 of an inch gap all the way around, so we get some good weld penetration on that part. And from here it was just tack welding. We started with just some little tack welds to make sure the surfaces were even. Put 1 or 2 tack welds on one side, and then I moved to the other side and put another tack weld just to make sure everything was lined up. Everything looks pretty level, so I'm just going to continue on doing some tack welds and just kind of slowly work my way around. So I went ahead and continued tack welding all around the perimeter of our patch. And I just kept going in between all the other welds until I got it all filled in. And it's not going to be terribly pretty. I've done a little bit of grinding here, but I'm not going to grind this all the way down and try to make it super pretty. It's going to be on the bottom side of the gas tank under the car. You're not going to see it. We're going to go ahead and paint it. So that's probably as far as I'm going to go.